Hello and welcome. I want to welcome all of you here to Congregation Sherith Israel for a very special evening. I'm Rabbi Jessica Graf, the senior rabbi here, and I'm delighted to be able to host this program. It's a very special night for us to have some wonderful speakers with us in honor of the memory of a very important person in our community. So in just a moment, I will introduce Rabbi Greg Wolfe, who will share just a few words about this lecture series that we're here for tonight. But first, I want to say what I say at the beginning of every program that we've had for the last 2.5 years, as we have gathered to talk about things that are wonderful and challenging and uncomfortable and that stretch us. And that is that we come together to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with us, who may agree with us, who share ideas that we haven't heard before. And it's our great privilege to be in a community that loves to challenge each other and to speak honestly and respectfully and to be able to hear things that we didn't know before. So I hope that this will be an evening that follows along in that tradition, inviting you to think differently about the challenging world in which we live right now and thinking about how we might help to make it better. So I'd like to invite Rabbi Greg Wolfe to say something on behalf of the Wolfe family about our Sheldon Wolfe Memorial Lecture that is our privilege to have here tonight. And I want to say thank you to Rhoda Wolfe, who has been a leader of our community along with Shel, past president of our congregation, for decades and decades, even bringing us the first Congregation Sherith Israel born and raised rabbi who joined, that we know about. I don't know. I think we would have known about any who came before you probably by this point.
Pre-Marty people.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I always like to say, now you see you're challenging me to say it. There are 9 of us who grew up here and became rabbis. I say it every time. I know Greg's going to roll his eyes. But Greg is number 6, and Greg is number 1. It is our great privilege to have him as a mentor and a leader also in the community as the president now of the Northern California Board of Rabbis. He holds a very important place in our community, making sure that important dialogues and important conversations take place. So we're so grateful to all of you, and Rhoda, to you for bringing all of this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Jessica Graf. Really, we're thrilled to be able to be here tonight, and want to thank Rabbi Jessica Graf and the whole team here at Sherith Israel, and Daniel and Dr. Yasmeen and Orly and the whole New Israel Fund team for making this possible and really expanding the opportunity to invite more people to share in this Sheldon Wolfe Memorial Lecture series. And also we want to thank all the other supporting, co-sponsoring synagogues, communities that have joined together with us tonight. And it's such a thrill to see everyone here with our family. And I'm joined, as I know, with my mom, Rhoda, our son, Noah, my sister, Amy, my wife, Julie. We see many friends, family who are here tonight. Many of you may have had a connection to my dad, and many of you may not know him at all. And he grew up right here at Sherith Israel, as I did, and he was bar mitzvah here. He would count all the lights here, and he would be thrilled to know that they're all lit. There are no burnt out bulbs tonight. When my dad passed away 3 years ago, as a family, we decided we wanted to do something that would celebrate and honor his memory and the things that were important to him, his values and his passions. And of course, hosting it here at Sherith Israel made a lot of sense because this place was very important and dear to him. He was a past president here and on the board for many years. And his love of Israel really started with my mom and dad's first trip to Israel back in 1975. That began a wonderful love affair that lasted for many, many years. And they had many trips to Israel, many of them with our family. And over the years, we built relationships with many, many friends. And he was on the overseas committee for the Federation, which led him to be very involved with the Amutah, the Jewish, I don't know what they were, like the council that would be funding various programs. And he would always come back and be very excited about the different things that he got to see and the projects that were being funded by the community And he was most excited about programs that were about fostering peace, building bridges, creating opportunities for shared society. And I know that he would have been thrilled to be able to see this program here tonight. So we want to thank you all for joining us. I know that this is a wonderful honor of his memory.
Thank you. Do you want to introduce Orly?
You got her title.
I don't know, so I can remember. I would like to introduce Orly Bine, who is going to introduce our speakers tonight. It's a great privilege to be able to host this lecture that is so important at this particular moment. Orly is, and I'm going to do this wrong after I tried and tried, the Director of Advancement,
Senior Director for the Bay. I can introduce myself.
Good. Okay,
Thanks,
good.
Jessica.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to put this back here. Hi, I'm Orly Bine. Thank you, Rabbi Jessica. Thanks to all of you. I'm the Senior Director for the New Israel Fund here in the Bay Area, and it is just so wonderful to be here with all of you today. I also want to thank everyone on the Sherith Israel staff for making this possible, and especially Peter Bonos for all of your work setting up. I'm not sure. There you are. Thank you, Peter. I also want to thank Rabbi Greg Wolfe for those wonderful remarks, and Rhoda Wolfe. It's such an honor to get to have this event in memory of Sheldon. Zichrono Livracha. And thank you to our amazing co-sponsors, the Kitchen Shared Society Project, Shar Zahav, Congregation Beth Shalom, Congregation Am Tikva, and Congregation Emmanuel. It's great to have so much community involved. I want to just say a few words before we pass it to our speakers for tonight, and to start by saying we're all here at a continuing difficult moment, and that's putting it mildly. In my 2 decades at the New Israel Fund, I can honestly say there's never been a more challenging 2 years for our work in human rights, democracy, peace, and Jewish-Arab shared society. And at the same time, it's never been more important. I think that for many of us, since October 7th especially, holding the progressive values, human rights values, and caring about Israel has become harder than ever. And when I think about it, I have this image of emotional pinball machine where we're constantly getting bounced around from side to side, from the devastation and shock of October 7th and what that meant, to the ongoing devastation in Gaza, and to the backlash against Israel, and to the defense of Israel, and to feeling empathy, and to wondering which side you stand on. And it's agonizing. And I want to say that for me, the answer to that struggle has constantly been the New Israel Fund. I truly have felt more deeply than ever that NIF has been kind of an oasis of humanity, where we have refused to see an enemy on either side, where we feel that you don't have to choose empathy for one or the other, that we can embrace all humans. And I know that this is a time where so many people, many friends of ours, friends of mine, family members, good, decent people, have lost some of their ability to see other people's humanity. And at NIF, we refuse to choose between empathy for one side or the other. We believe that all people living in the region, Jewish, Palestinian, or of any other background, all deserve to live with dignity and human rights. And our work follows these values. NIF is the leading organization for human rights and democracy. We support Israeli civil society, basically the nonprofits on the ground in Israel, like the ACLU of Israel, Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and so many others. These are all organizations that today are fighting extremism, violence, and racism, and working toward a more equal, democratic, inclusive, peaceful Israel, with equality for all citizens, with an end to the occupation and a path toward a future of peace. When you support the New Israel Fund, it's like supporting a whole ecosystem of organizations that are working for a better future. And tonight, we are fortunate to have two of NIF's amazing leaders talking about the current reality and where we're going from here. I'm honored to introduce, briefly, our CEO, Daniel Sokatch, who has been part of the New Israel Fund now for 17 years, and NIF board member, Dr. Yasmeen Abu Fraiha. Daniel has, as many of you know, also published a book a few years ago called Can We Talk About Israel? A guide for the curious, confused, and conflicted. This is not a book talk. There will be book talks in the not-so-distant future because a new edition has come out, which is already available, so I want to just urge folks who are eager to get their hands on it. It is available. You can buy it online where books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or his publisher, Bloomsbury. And now, Yasmeen. I want to say a few words about Yasmeen, and you'll hear more. She has been a total inspiration to me. I think of you as one of my heroes. She's an internal medicine doctor who's also a founder of a nonprofit serving the Bedouin community, an activist who has channeled her professional work to address health disparities between Jews and Arabs in Israel. She's currently completing a clinical fellowship in critical care medicine at Beth Israel Medical Center in Boston, as well as a fellowship at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard. In 2023, this is just to embarrass you, she was named one of Israel's 50 most influential women by Globes magazine. Yasmeen earned her medical degree at Hebrew University of Jerusalem and has an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School. And one last note, we'll be passing around note cards as you hear the talk tonight. If you have questions, please write them down on the note cards. We'll collect them for our speakers at the end so we can try to include as many questions as possible. Without further ado, Daniel and Yasmeen.
Don't forget to turn your thingy on. Well, good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be here and to see all of you on a school night to talk with us. And it's such a treat for me on a personal level to be here with you. I want to thank not only this congregation, not only Sherith, but all the others who joined in, Rabbi Jessica and Mishpachat Wolfe, the Wolfe clan, for your support of all of the values that we stand for. I'm so glad you guys get to meet Yasmeen, because the truth is, those of you in San Francisco, we know each other and you hear me a lot, so this will be a lot more interesting because we're going to focus much more broadly than what we usually talk about when you meet me. So to kick it off, and again, someone said maybe the rabbi a lecture. It's not going to be a lecture, it's going to be more of a conversation, and then we'll talk with you when you ask your questions. We thought it would be interesting and probably useful to give a sense of where we see the current situation, right? We're in the midst of a very fragile ceasefire. It is a ceasefire that has been broken already several times, 2 times very significantly. But like so many other things in the era of our current president, he keeps saying it's a ceasefire, and the parties don't seem to have the will to break from him. And I think that's the first important point that I would like to put out there, and then you'll share some of your thoughts about where we are, which is for the last, Orly, the only thing that Orly said that I would like to make a slight amendment to is it hasn't been the last 2 years, but rather the last 3 years of catastrophic cascading crises in Israel. Right, we could go a lot further back, but beginning in 2023, in early 2023, when the current government came to power, made up of 3 parts, what I like to call the MAGA Likud, right? That is to say, the ruling party, Likud, which was traditionally the right-wing Democratic Party, has changed in ways that may sound familiar to many of us here, from a party that sort of evinced conservative security and economic policies to one in the thrall of the leader and totally concerned with the legal and political and personal security of that leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. Because he had burned so many bridges with other parties on the right and the center, he, after narrowly winning the last election in late 22, had to turn to one reliable old ally bloc and a third new one. Because remember, in the history of Israel, no single party has run the government. You always have to build coalitions. First, he turned to the ultra-Orthodox, his reliable partners, the Haredim, as we call them in Hebrew, and then a new bloc. And this was the bloc of extremist, Jewish supremacist, ultra-nationalist parties led by two men, one called Itamar Ben-Gvir and one called Bezalel Smotrich. Ben-Gvir convicted multiple times for incitement to terrorism, and Smotrich, a man who described himself as, and I'm quoting, a proud homophobe and a proud fascist. All you need to do is Google it right now, and you'll see that even I couldn't make up something quite like that. With these parties in power, the coalition set out to sort of go after the one check and balance to their ultra-nationalist, ultra-right-wing agenda. And we, in this room, many of us know what that one official check and block was in Israel. The one block that endangered Benjamin Netanyahu's legal safety, he thrice indicted on felony corruption charges. The one party that told the ultra-Orthodox, you actually have to serve in the army. And the one party, the same party, that upon occasion told the settlers, you cannot expand settlements in the way that you want to. What was that party? It was the High Court of Justice. And so when it came to power, the new government launched what they called a judicial reform, and what the Israeli press called a judicial coup, and what we at New Israel Fund called a continuing attack on democracy. And it was at that moment that an unforeseen, even by us, and we're the leadership of the New Israel Fund, force emerged and shoved a stick in the spoke of the wheel of autocracy, and that was civil society. Right? Organizations funded by New Israel Fund, and all of you who support NIF, launched a protest movement that caught fire, turned into a mass protest movement, which stopped, to this day, the most egregious aspects of the so-called judicial reform project, although they're still trying to push them through. Everything changed on October 7th. And on October 7th, we're going to talk a lot more about that. But where we are now is, of course, Donald Trump, for reasons that have to do, I believe, very little with more than his own personal desire for adulation and enrichment, has imposed a ceasefire. And let's be very clear, there would be no ceasefire without President Trump imposing the ceasefire on Israel and the other players. Whether or not he has the stick-to-itiveness and the desire to see it through is the big question mark, but we have to give credit where credit is due. And here I'm just taking off my NIF cap before I hand this over to you for your comments, and putting on my personal cap. When my friends and family and staff have asked me, how do we understand Trump doing this? You know, I say, well, first of all, you know, I say what I just said. He has his own interests. Benjamin Netanyahu, I think, made a terrible strategic error when he bombed Qatar, right, which is, of course, the home of the biggest military base of the United States in the Middle East, a close ally of the U.S., and, of course, the people who just gave Donald Trump a new airplane. And after he did this, I think he mistakenly felt he was invulnerable after the U.S. jumped in to help him bomb Iran. He angered the Gulf states who told Trump, either you rein him in or our deals that are enriching you and your family and cronies are over, and that's when things changed. And so whether or not they continue to change, we will see. But what I tell friends and family when they ask is, look, think of our interests and values as this, and think of Mr. Trump's as that, and right here they're intersecting. So let's take the win. Things are better today than they were a couple of months ago. How long that lasts and how much better they are is still a huge question.
So first, again, thank you all for coming and just taking the time to be with us. I want to zoom in a little bit on, instead of like talking about geopolitics, but actually talking about what this ceasefire or so-called ceasefire is doing to the Israeli society and also the Palestinian society. What does it even mean when we talk about ceasefire? So for the Israeli society, the mission since October 7th was to get the hostages back. And the living hostages all came back. A few of the died those who were killed, basically, either on October 7th or after that, are on their way. At least we still have 8 hostages that we're waiting to bring back. But one of, I guess, my concerns is that this will bring us to a point where we say, okay, now this is over now. But actually, we got to October 7th, and we got to today. This is actually a symptom of a long process that has happened prior to October 7th, and many, many processes. So one of them is the attacks on democracy. Second is the treatment of the Palestinians, and the idea that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be managed. Which was a concept that was encouraged and supported by Netanyahu. This was his legacy, basically. And not only Netanyahu, also Naftali Bennett used to say that this is, I don't know how to translate it, but he called it Rasis B'Eshvan. It's like excuse my French, but a pain in the ass. But it's something that you can deal with, but you don't have to solve. And you don't have to do anything with the Palestinians, and they won't have the equal rights, and they won't have their human rights. But every now and then we'll have some military escalation, and it will be fine. But then the judicial coup happened, and part of what you'd hear in the Palestinian community within Israel is saying, oh, hello, good morning to all of you. Now you're reminded that your democracy is under attack. But actually, if you would have looked into what's going on in the West Bank and in Gaza in the past, since 1967, some would even say even before that, you would see that actually these policies that we've seen in the West Bank and in Gaza are finding their way into Israel proper. If it's the Supreme Court, if it's what we see that in the police and policing and maybe over-policing of or police violence against protesters. We see political arrests. They used to be only for Palestinians. Now political arrests of left-wing activists and people who demonstrated against the war, demonstrated against the government. And I'm saying all of this because going back to now the ceasefire, now the Israeli community is in this crossroads, and we need to decide are we going back to October 6, 2023? Saying okay, the war is over, now let's go back to our businesses and what we do, and forget that we have a burning issue that we have to solve. Or we decide that we cannot go back to the way we were, and we have to deal with it and actually talk about the difficult issues and the core issues. And this is again where civil society comes in, because these organizations that we're talking about, the organizations that are giving legal aid to activists, and organizations that are bringing new ideas to the table, whether ideas that are visions to the region or visions to Israel-Palestine, to the solution of the conflict, or organizations that are bringing protective presence to protect Palestinians from settler violence. They did it before October 7th. They're doing it even more today, and they are actually our spokespersons in a way on the ground, bringing reality to the Israeli society, but also to all of you and to us. And they are gaining momentum, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, or later this evening. And another thing that I wanted to say is actually to talk for a second about the Palestinians as well, because the ceasefire is maybe, and again, it is very, very fragile, but yes, it stopped the bombing, right? But it's not like lives in the West Bank and Gaza are better. There are only, just so you know what's going on in Gaza at the moment, so the Israeli government, together with the Israeli military, has redefined the criteria that is needed in order to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. This has happened a few months ago. And the ceasefire actually made it even more difficult to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. There are only 9 organizations that are authorized to bring aid into Gaza. They need to go through very, very difficult bureaucracy, very, very difficult authorization process. And despite the fact that the fight is over, so-called over, still it's not like the Gaza Strip is now open. People are still hungry. 70% of the strip is basically destroyed. And even medical evacuations are now even more difficult than they were before the ceasefire, because part of the things that need to happen to actually get people evacuated because of medical reasons from the Gaza Strip is that countries will be willing to accept them as refugees and as patients. But once there's no war anymore, then the countries are less accepting them. So in these situations, again, we rely on our civil society organizations like Gisha, that are actually advocating for people in Gaza to actually bring them not to Italy or Spain, but to the West Bank, where they used to get treatments before the war, and also to try and fight the policy of divide and conquer, of these are actually 2 separate territories. And lastly, there's what's going on in the West Bank. And the fact that all eyes were on Gaza in the past 2 years, it actually brought significant escalation of violence into the West Bank. Many communities were displaced and still are. And if you think of what happened in Israeli politics after October 7th, the thought was that that's it. Netanyahu is doomed. He's not coming back. What we see now is that there is this hubris of Netanyahu and his government after 2 years of being able to stay in power. Some of it because the opposition is as bad as our government. And they actually escalated almost all of their policies against Palestinians in the West Bank. And there again, the only protection that we see on human rights in the West Bank are civil society organizations, and I'm glad to say, our grantees.
The irony there is that, just as I said, in a kind of funny, unanticipated, unsought out, I don't want to call it an alliance, but sort of odd partnership, the civil society movement that refused to give the government of Israel a day of peace. By the way, I don't know how many of you saw Masha Gessen's piece in the New York Times today, where it's called something like "How to Be a Good Citizen of a Bad Country." Clearly an allegory that they mean for us to consider in America, but they're writing about Israel. 2 of the people that they're writing about are NIF activists, including Michael Sfard, Israel's leading human rights lawyer. But one of the ironies of this moment is that it is the constant presence of civil society, both in protesting the war and demanding an end to the war and a return of the hostages, that Donald Trump was able to parlay into his orders to Netanyahu to stop. Similarly, on the West Bank, where sadly there is no mass Israeli movement, but just our grantee organizations, which are shining a light on what's happening, holding a mirror up to Israeli society and saying, is this what you want done in your name? Trying to figure out how do you slow down the process of de facto annexation. In one of the great ironies of my years at NIF, they were sent a big assist by Donald J. Trump, who last week said, Israel will not be annexing the West Bank, I won't allow it. So the whole point of that anecdote is that we're in a very strange place, my friends. So we started with some analysis and trying to give some perspective as to the global, if you will, the geopolitical level here. Yasmeen, you zoomed in, as you said, on the ground. I'd like to zoom in further and talk about you for a minute. I thought I was moved when Orly said that you were one of her heroes. I know this is not your favorite topic. You should see how uncomfortable she looks right now up close. But in many ways, I think for many of us, you and your story embody something that is at the essence and the core of the New Israel Fund, and I think that's one of the reasons you have risen to be one of the preeminent leaders of the organization during your time on the board. And I'd love it if you would tell our friends here a little bit about who you are and why you do what you do. And what I really would like you to I would like you to tell the story. On October 7th, you were in the emergency room at Soroka Hospital, the largest hospital in the southern part of the country. And you spent those days treating the wounded and tended to the dying, the victims of Hamas. And you said something to me on October 8th, which you then said to the whole community. And I'd like you to, with that cliffhanger, I would like you to sort of tell folks here a little bit about how you came to do what you do and what it was that you realized and said on that day, and how it has really guided so much of what we've tried to do since then.
Okay, that's a good build-up.
Don't let me down.
Okay. So, a little bit of a rewind. So I'm Bedouin, I'm a Palestinian citizen of Israel. I was born in a Bedouin town in the south called Tel Sheva. And when I was about 5 years old, my parents made a decision to move to a Jewish town called Omer. And my father always says that the distance between the two is 5 minutes by car, but it's like driving through time, about 100 years in development. We were only the second Bedouin family to move in. And the reason I'm telling this story is because I grew up in a household that really believed in living together. My parents really believed in opening their house and living next door to Jewish people, and learning with them, learning from them, working with them. That's the atmosphere that I grew up on. My parents were political activists. They were the co-founders of the Coexistence Forum of the Negev. They built the peace tent back in the 90s in Tzomet Shoket. So this is where I come from. And I studied medicine in Jerusalem, which was another life-changing event, where it was the first time, despite the fact that I was raised and grew up on the Palestinian stories and always knew that I was Palestinian, I never really understood the Palestinian struggle until I arrived to Jerusalem, and I met the Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem and learned what they are going through on a daily basis. And meeting patients who needed to bribe the PA and the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Israel just to get treatments in Hadassah Hospital. And because I had this deep connection to the people of the Negev, and because my parents always taught us that you get education because you need to succeed in life, yes, but you get educated so you can go back and serve your community. So I went back and served my community and spent a few years in Soroka Medical Center in Be'er Sheva. For those of you who don't know, Soroka is the biggest, or basically the only, hospital in the area. And on October 7th, I was already a senior doctor. I was on call. I woke up 6:30 with the rockets. And the first thought that I had in my mind was, I can't believe this is happening again. And no one remembers that anymore, but 5 months before October 7th, 2023, in May 2023, there was a few days of military escalation in Gaza, and we already had all these protocols of what do we do, and we in the South are very, very used to it, if that makes sense. So that's how I thought about this in the beginning. And I rushed to the hospital because I knew I needed to take care of patients. But nothing prepares you, right? Nothing prepared me to what I was about to see that day. And I heard about this for the first time from my patients in my department, my internal medicine department. They were the ones showing me the videos and telling me there are gunmen in the kibbutzim, and I knew at about 10 a.m. that I needed to go to the emergency room and just help. And I spent the next 16 hours in the emergency room in Soroka, treating patients who came. So the first ones were actually people who are, Mizrahi Jews who come from Ofakim, Sderot, Netivot, the towns in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And I would treat people who came from the kibbutzim, so more like left-wing Ashkenazi people. I treated tourists from Europe coming for the music festival. I treated foreign workers from Thailand and Nepal who worked in the kibbutzim or in the fields, and I treated Bedouins who came with their family members, kids who were severely injured from direct hits from rockets that were fired from the Gaza Strip. And after so many hours of working, I looked around. I needed to take a breath, and I looked around, and I thought, not only that our patients are coming from all these backgrounds and are very diverse, and that also the team, the treating team. So I was on call. I had to be there in a way, but my colleagues came from all around the Negev. Just the minute that they heard that something is happening, they came. Some of them were people who were, who used to work in the hospital, and they still rushed in, and they were religious Jews, settlers, people, again, secular Jews, and Bedouins. Many Bedouins, paramedics, nurses, physicians, and this is what we talked about, and this is what this was my epiphany at that moment, was that it's not about Israelis or Palestinians. This is not the conflict. It's not Jewish or Arabs. It's about the dividing line is between people who believe that violence is the answer to this conflict and people who believe in humanity and in compassion and in sanctity of life. That's it. And I thought, I feel strongly about this today even more, because in retrospect, in the past 2 years, we've seen it even more. I am still in opinion, or my view is still that everyone should be able, at least everyone on my side, should be able to say, killing is bad, ceasefire good. And sadly, many people are not able to say it. Many people are still finding it very difficult to say that starving children is bad, that no one should be hungry, without buts, without justification. I think that we talked about this previously. I think that bombing a hospital is a war crime, whether it happens in Gaza or it happens in Soroka. Period. And I think this notion really shifted and reframed the way I think about this conflict and the way I think about the work that we're doing. Because the other thing that happened on October 7th, at least that I understood, is that there's no government. The government is gone. At about 6 p.m., I treated this patient who came with a very, very bad injury. But the only thing that he could scream about was not his pain, but about how it is unbelievable that he had to wait for 10 hours to be rescued. There was no rescue, no welfare services, nothing. It all collapsed, and I think that's the worst when you think we're such a. I grew up a socialist, but I also found that civil society, my neighbors, my friends, Miki Gitzin, who's the executive director of New Israel Fund in Israel, was one of the first people not only to call me and ask how I was. He came to the Negev, to our headquarters that we started for the Bedouin community, I think maybe 2 days into the war, where at the same time I worked in the Ministry of Health and I did not get the same support.
You know, you reminded me of, on that terrible day, one of the kind of bright moments was in the days that followed. You know, as you just said, the government, you know, so many Israelis are furious still and will remain furious at the catastrophic failure of the government to anticipate and stop or prevent what happened on October 7th. But equally infuriating to people, like that story you told about the patient, is the absence of the government in the days and weeks and even months after October 7th. And an amazing thing happened, which is that civil society that had been in the streets shouting democracy, democracy, pivoted. It turned on a dime, including New Israel Fund. And many of you are New Israel Fund supporters. You know that we don't exist to do the provision of social services. My socialist friend over here, you know, that's supposed to be the job of the government, right?
Yeah.
Or at least organizations that are interested. You know, NIF is one of the let's find out why people are hungry and change the policy that's causing hunger, rather than let's give the food out. But in the days after October 7th, in the weeks and months, we also had to shift and for a period of months provide actual social services. We purchased hundreds of iPads for Bedouin kids whose schools had been blown up. We sent one of our grantees, Physicians for Human Rights, to Eilat to treat people who had been injured. And sort of my favorite of these stories was, you mentioned there were 3 communities that really took the brunt of the horror of October 7th in Israel. There were the Bedouin villages that are not recognized by the state of Israel as being the state of Israel says that's uninhabited land because they don't want them to be there, right? Which of course is not unique to Israel. It's how many settled societies deal with nomadic peoples. But in Israel, there's the added dimension of the Jewish, non-Jewish divide. So when your land in the western Negev is designated uninhabited, it means that you don't have to provide bomb shelters and you don't have to provide Iron Dome protection. And I will say that in the weeks after the war, we supported grantees in sending an appeal to the High Court of Justice demanding that the High Court order the government to declare that area inhabited, so you have to provide services for people there.
Yeah, and I was on that call, and it was a historic day because we had like a major general in the Israeli military saying, now they're on the map. So I'm like, okay.
On the map.
Yes, big accomplishment.
So this is, I jokingly say that the kibbutzim, where NIF staff and grantees and one of our former board members were murdered, right? The kibbutzim, the Bedouin villages, that's sort of blue state Israel. It's kind of NIF heartland Israel. But the cities that you described on the northern borders of Gaza, the hard-scrabbled Mizrahi towns of Ofakim and Sderot, that's kind of red state Israel. It's not a place where NIF is necessarily the most popular name in town. And on October 8th, the residents of Ofakim, one of these cities, largely Mizrahi, Likud voting town, were evacuated to the Dead Sea. And when they got there, they were told by the hotels there, we didn't know you were coming and no one has made any arrangements and we're very sorry. We don't have anything for you. So a community activist from Ofakim called the CFO of NIF in Israel, a wonderful guy called Ronen, and said, can you help us? And Ronen called Mickey Gitson, our director in Israel, and it was nighttime here, so he thought, as he said, I figured you'd be okay with it, but if not, I would ask for forgiveness, not permission, which is, that's what I do, so he should do it too. And he authorized hundreds and hundreds of hotel rooms for thousands and thousands of residents of Ofakim. So NIF literally was paying for hotel rooms of evacuees from these towns. And that moment of kind of lightness in that worst week of so many of our lives was when one of these activists from Ofakim tweeted. She said, when we had our darkest moment, we found out who the true angels in Israel were. And it wasn't the government, it was the traitors from the New Israel Fund, which I still like to believe was comedic and tongue-in-cheek, but either way, it was a moment that we're proud of. Coming out of October 7th, we were also founding funders and one of the largest funders of the Hostage Family Forum, which now thankfully is most of their work. As you said, you are still waiting on on the bodies of several hostages, but most of the work of the forum is now completed. And over the last months, we have shifted back to more traditional NIF work, but really focusing on the reality of now. And so I think maybe we'll conclude this part before we open it up for questions, just with a description of what that work looks like on the ground. Many of you are longtime NIF donors, and when NIF began in 1979, the philosophy of the organization was very much, let 100 flowers bloom, right? We'll support liberal Israeli civil society, we'll support not so liberal Israeli civil society. And we believe that that this civil society, this ecosystem of nonprofit organizations representing marginalized and minority communities and unpopular ideas like civil rights and human rights will be a necessary ingredient to Israel's continued emergence as a democracy. And that worked fine up until a point. And that point for NIF was around 2014, when we assessed that what our former board chair, Nomi Chazan, deputy speaker of the Knesset, in her day, called a democracy recession in Israel. And we made the decision then that we needed to shift our resources to focus on defending democratic institutions and building a pro-democracy movement so that the things that we had always supported, human rights, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, the rights of minority citizens of Israel, that those things would be protected by a democratic society, which now we assess was under threat. I remember an Israeli commentator called me Chicken Little, because it looked funny in the Hebrew. It took me 10 minutes to figure out that it was English that he had mocked me with, because it's really hard when they transliterate. And I saw that journalist at one of the democracy protests in Tel Aviv, and Mickey Gitson, about whom we've said so much tonight, would not let me go up and confront him, because he said, he's on the right side now, leave him alone. But even the people who were critical of NIF then have come around to seeing the threat to democracy that we see now, and many Americans who might have questioned our analysis when they saw what happened to their own country don't question it anymore. So we shifted our strategy in 2014, and after October 7th, we further honed it. We now are looking, as you referenced before, we're supporting grantees and organizations and projects that are working to build a movement for democracy in Israel, to work for real equality for all Israelis, in particular the 21% of the population that are Palestinian citizens of Israel, Arab Israelis. Think of it this way. Think of the extent to which the history of Black Americans has dictated the trajectory of our own history as a country, right? Our own sins as a country, our own mistakes as a country. They're African Americans, Black Americans are about 13% of the population of this country. Arab citizens of Israel are 21% of a country of 10 million people. So where goes that massive national minority, so goes Israel. So NIF sees on both moral, but also on strategic grounds, the essential priority of building a truly equal society for all of Israeli citizens. And then we focus on, you referenced this too, what is happening in the West Bank, where under the fog of war, there has been an attempt to essentially de facto annex the West Bank. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we were thrown a great assist by the president, who last week announced that he wouldn't allow that to happen. So this is where NIF is. This is the state of play right now as we look at this fragile moment of, the rabbi said to us before we went on that she felt this was a moment of real opportunity and real hope for change, and we agree. Whether or not we are all here to see that change, that's another question. But what I know is that it is the great honor of my life to work with Yasmeen and Orly and the team at NIF in Israel and America and around the world to do our part to take that torch in the relay race towards a better future for all Israelis and a better future for Israel in the region, and pass it on so that this idea that was enshrined in the 13th paragraph of Israel's Declaration of Independence, that Israel should be a homeland and a place of refuge, an ingathering of the exiles, as it says, for the Jewish people, and at the same time, a democratic, equal society for all of its residents, regardless of race, religion, or, believe it or not, it even says, gender. So that's what NIF works for. You can reject the dichotomy, as Orly said earlier, of Israel always right or Israel always wrong, and you can join us in working for an Israel that is right. So thank you so much for coming out. And now we'll take some of your questions.
Maybe I'll add briefly in the time we're waiting that going back to the question of ceasefire, we also understand that the work does not stop. This is actually the time that is most needed, right, to build equality, freedom, and a good, strong democratic infrastructure and democratic society.
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us and for the incredible work that you do every single day on the ground. You really are heroes. We have a number of questions, and I want to encourage people to continue to write questions. First of all, let me start off by saying today marks 30 years since Retzach Rabin, since the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. And I just want to ask you from your perspective, I want to mark this moment because it's an important moment in history. What changed? What has changed since then?
Okay. So a lot has changed, but then again, also many things have not changed. So just to give you some perspective, and I'm sorry, I do not mean to depress you, but it may be a little bit depressing. Itamar Ben-Gvir was a young person when Rabin was the prime minister. And there's a very famous, we talked about this today, there's a very infamous interview with him where he holds the symbol from Rabin's car, and he says...
The hood ornament. The word for symbol and hood ornament are the same in Hebrew.
Thank you. Hood ornament. I learned something new today. So he holds it, and he says, the way we got to this hood ornament means that we can actually get to him also. And he was assassinated about 3 weeks after that. The same Itamar Ben-Gvir is today the Minister of National Security in Israel. So that's one thing that changed. He used to be this extreme lunatic guy that represent something that is very, like it's a non-legitimate ideology in Israeli society. And today, he is in the mainstream. And I think the story is not Ben-Gvir, it's his ideology and the things that he brings in to Israeli society. On the other side, in terms of the opposition and the left-wing camp in Israel, I think we are still mourning, we're still in grief, and I think people find it very difficult to move on in a way. But, and here's how I hope you'll be a little bit hopeful. I think things have really shifted in the past 3 years. So despite the fact that our opposition is still like very much away, like very far from Rabin's legacy, his ideas of long-lasting peace, his ideas about stopping bloodshed, are now gaining more and more momentum. We start seeing similar rhetoric in the Democrat Party, led by Yair Golan, and I really hope that this war and what we see with the judicial overhaul, or coup, or you call it whatever you want, is that people understand that you can't have it all. You can't both want a Jewish and democratic state, but also controlling the Palestinians or ignoring the conflict with the Palestinians. And these very, very difficult 3 years, I hope will bring some, already brought some work of learning of what democracy is, what freedom is, what equality is. And I truly hope we'll see some change in the coming elections, which will hopefully be in the next fall, maybe.
I would just add to that. I mean, look, the honest answer to your question is Yasmeen just indicated. Is that the changes over the last 30 years, for the most part, have not been good ones. But then again, that's true of what's happened around much of the world. So don't want to isolate the Israeli case because it's connected to the rest of the world. It's got its own unique, attributes. But if you look at the conflicts when I got out of college in the 90s, and boy, was it a great decade. Turned out it was kind of an outlier, right? And there were plenty of terrible things that happened in the 90s. Look at Rwanda and Yugoslavia. But it was also a decade that saw, and we know this, but just think about it for a minute, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the release by de Klerk of Mandela from Robben Island and the end of apartheid, the White House lawn handshake between Rabin and Arafat, peace between Israel and Jordan, the Good Friday Accords in Northern Ireland bringing to an end 500 years of sectarian conflict. Like, this actually happened. And many of those situations, most of them, maybe not Ireland, are in not great shape to varying degrees, and right at the bottom of them is, of course, what happened in Russia and Israel. And so that's just the truth. On the other hand, what you said is not just icing to make us feel better on what is otherwise a crappy cake, right? Gesson's article today in the New York Times there is a real core of that article, and it's something that I hope we can learn from. Because what I'll tell you is, over the last 3 years, and again, I'm saying 3 years because I'm including the year of the judicial reform / coup, I obviously travel frequently to Israel. I'm there all the time. And I have seen a civil society that, as I said earlier, has not given those in power a moment's rest, that has been dogged. And I don't just mean I also mean the kind of mainstream that once the war is over and the hostages are back, may in fact lose interest. I mean the people who have formed the core of this movement, people who agree with much of what we believe. And that civil society did manage to stop, thus far, the judicial reform program. And I think there's real hope in that. And I'll tell you, there aren't a lot of places around the world where you see that level of mass sustained resistance. And so when I encounter people who tell me that, all Israelis are evil and how can you support or invest in a place like Israel, I sort of say to them, well, maybe you need to learn more about what's happening in Israel, because you're absolutely right that the direction of the country is a horrible one. I agree with that. I agree that people in charge, like in charge in my own country and in other countries, are a venal and conscienceless lot. But there is in Israel something to be emulated, and that is this core of civil society. I think that, along with the food, the last 30 years have seen an outrageous advancement in the food in Israel. It is one of the best places to go eat in the world. And by the way, I can attest that the Irish have done the same thing, so go figure. But I truly believe that what we have seen, and the real reason for hope, is a civil society that in many ways is the envy of the world.
So we've gotten a lot of questions about rebuilding Gaza and sort of what happens next from a practical perspective. And I want to kind of combine them into a bigger question about leadership, about the next steps in Gaza. How do we go forward with Hamas still a functioning entity in Gaza? How do we rebuild hospitals that are so desperately needed? Who is going to bring this forward? Because now we find ourselves here, I think, in a place of tremendous possibility, but also tremendous challenge of trying to figure out what to do with the part of the world that is 70% rubble right now.
I'll say a quick word about that, and then you speak maybe as a doctor and someone who knows about what has happened to the medical system there and what needs to be in place. First of all, much of this is beyond our purview as officials of the New Israel Fund. We, as many of you know, did take a decision which was, I mentioned earlier that we were supporting social services in the wake of October 7th. We took a decision at the beginning of 2024 that we're very, very proud of, which is we decided, and by the way, interestingly, this issue was pushed by our Israeli staff, who called me up and said, what are we going to do about the suffering in Gaza? And so NIF launched a project which to date has raised well over $3 million from all of you to support humanitarian aid into Gaza, to support organizations working to end suffering. We've worked with 2 organizations to date. We're looking at some other ones now to expand our portfolio. One of them is World Central Kitchen, Chef Jose Andres, who I'll quickly tell you a little story. By the way, go to his restaurants and patronize them, because this person is really, he's a lamid vavnik, as we say, he's the real deal. And when we called them up, we did a lot of research, because you could imagine how I thought the board meeting was going to go when I convened these guys, because I felt this is something we needed the board's approval if we were going to do, because obviously this might prove very controversial.
And it was April of 2024.
Yeah.
Right? It was very, very early.
Very early. Not only did it not prove controversial on the board, it was like this enthusiastic, unanimous, immediate affirmation. And part of what I said to the board was, look, this may be very difficult for us, because it may be that one of these aid agencies that we're going to support, and we did enormous amounts of homework in researching who we talked to people for hours and hours, but something could go wrong. It could turn out there's a Hamas operative who was working for one of them. By the way, none of those things happened. But I laid it all out, and the board said, like we just said, go do it. And the main partner was, as I said, Jose Andreas's World Central Kitchen. We worked in the first year with the International Rescue Committee, and then with a little NGO started by a Palestinian and Israeli women in Berlin, 2 women called Clean Shelter, which during Israel's blockade of any food aid into Gaza from March through the end of May of this year, they kind of figured out a way to help transform. They built kind of makeshift desalinators, so at least fresh water was getting in. And again, we did tons of research on these organizations. When we spoke with the people from World Central Kitchen, when the staffer who I'd asked to be the point person for this, he spoke to his interlocutor when we were setting the relationship up, and he said, "I bet you haven't gotten too many offers like this from our sector." And she said, "We haven't gotten any offers like this from any sector." So for those of us who were part of this effort, it made a huge difference on not just actual grounds, but even though it was a drop in the bucket, but in terms of the moral support for World Central Kitchen. That woman that we were talking to was one of the 7 World Central Kitchen staffers who was killed in an Israeli airstrike. We continue working with them to this day, and this has been a kind of a sight line into the catastrophic situation in Gaza. So that's a story of how NIF has leveraged in our small way, which I'm sorry to say is one of the bigger ways out there. Support for people suffering in Gaza will continue to do that. But again, the reconstruction of Gaza, who's going to lead it, those are things that are way above our pay grade. And so the simplest answer is we don't know.
Yeah, and maybe to add, but there are other things that we do as part of the NIF's work, is we do think about the day after, and we do support organizations that think about building. So organizations that think about different solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and organizations that bring new ideas to the region. And I think one of the things that at least bothers me the most is that all of these discussions about rebuilding Gaza and the reconstructions, and even thinking about the peace convention in Sharm el-Sheikh that happened a few days after the ceasefire was announced, the Israelis and the Palestinians were not there. So, and this is basically a Marshall Plan without the Germans,
or the Japanese,
right? And I think what at least me personally, but I know that also NIF, what we want is to not wait for someone else to decide for us, but actually bring the Israelis and the Palestinians to the table and come ready with ideas, with policies, with plans. And part of our Seizing the Moment program, which is also, we call it also building and blocking. So blocking the annexation, but also building new ideas, and specifically political imagination, is part of our support on how do we see the future in the region. And honestly, what the NIF board has decided is basically to say, we don't know how the future may look like, but there are some experts who are doing significant and important work on this, and they're lobbying or like at least talking about this in places around the world, and there are scholars and there are activists who are collaborating with Palestinian leadership. Why not give them our support so they can actually do the work? So when we get to the money time, which is basically now, we will have plans in place.
I know we have a lot of questions, but I'll give you one concrete example of when Yasmeen describes what we call the seizing the moment plan, taking advantage of where we are now, Rabbi Jessica's idea that this is a moment of opportunity, which we also think. Here's a concrete example of a thing NIF is doing. We support an organization called ACORD. It's a clinic at the Hebrew University, your medical school alma mater, run by a political psychologist called Eran Halperin. And what he and his team do is twofold, maybe threefold. First, they are constantly polling. Not polling every few months, polling every week. Polls are out to try to gauge how Israelis are feeling, but more importantly, how messages are hitting them. Right, so they're developing and devising messages. Now, many of you have heard of a guy right here in the Bay Area called George Lakoff, who's a linguist at Berkeley. He's the guy, he wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant, and the great lesson I learned as a young activist from George Lakoff was, you don't have to fight on the terms of the people that you're working against, in opposition to, right? And the example he used to always give was, if you just parachuted into America from Mars and you understood the debate around reproductive freedom, what's a better brand, pro-choice or pro-life? And he was like, why are you fighting on their terms? Reframe. And so when the LGBTQ movement said, let's stop talking about gay rights and start talking about marriage equality, they won because they reframed the debate. So Halperin and his people in Israel are trying to reframe the debate. So they poll, they come up with new messaging, and then they give the messaging to our grantees that are doing activist work on the ground. And it's just a great example of how investments in a really smart, strategic operation can have ripple effects. And we don't have time to go into what those are. Happy to tell you later, that actually push the ball forward in terms of our values.
Mm-hmm. So you've both seen so much trouble on the ground, so many really challenging situations over the years, but particularly in the last couple of years. How do you not succumb to despair? What gives you hope in this time when it's been very hard to find, glimmers of light in this really terrible situation?
I mean, working with Daniel.
I was going to say
and with
it's
Becky,
Yasmeen. Yeah.
and with Orly. I mean, honestly, this is where I literally don't understand people who lose hope, because they're not part of our circles, right? When after 2 years of war, we work with people, both Israelis and Palestinians, who are like, peace is here. We work with people who lost their parents, who lost their friends, who lost their colleagues, and they're like, we're going to make this happen. We're going to bring the hostages back home, and we're going to take this government down, and we're going to protect Palestinians in the West Bank, and we're going to bring peace. And that's the best thing ever. Every time I am a little bit in despair, I find someone from my NIF circles and listen to what they're doing and and how their day was, and it fills me with hope, because I really am inspired by all these people who go Shabbat after Shabbat to the West Bank to sit with Palestinians. With people who are, who call physicians in Gaza to just ask them, what do they need? How can you be in despair when you work with these people?
Yeah, I mean, ditto. And the NIF staff in the room are going to roll their eyes back into their heads because they've heard me tell this story before. But I think when I get that question, it always makes me think about Taylor Branch's monumental 3-volume history of the civil rights movement. How many of you have read this book? Oh my gosh, this is all right. This is your reading assignment. Don't worry, there are only 3 books of like about 800 pages each. But the books are called, it's the history of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. And their first volume is called Parting the Waters, and the second volume is called Pillar of Fire, and the third volume is called At Canaan's Edge. So how about that? But But it's the first 100 pages of the first book that I always think about when I think about this question of despair. Because in that first 100 pages, we meet scores of people who, from the end of the Civil War in 1865, most of these people are black people living in the South, but there are other people who are working as allies in the North and elsewhere. And from the end of the Civil War through Reconstruction and the collapse of Reconstruction and Jim Crow and segregation and the earliest civil rights movement, they toiled away in anonymity and obscurity to fight for voting rights and to fight for equal rights and to fight for transportation rights. And they didn't believe, most of them, when you read their stories, and most of them were right, that they would live to see the day when there was going to be a Martin Luther King or a Rosa Parks, and I bet they didn't even really dare to dream of the day where there'd be a Barack Obama or a Kamala Harris. But they continued to prepare the way, and I remember when Obama got elected, I thought about the book because he talked about the people on whose shoulders he stood. And when I think about these people, who again, we don't know their names, but without them, our country would not be even in the perilous place where we are. We would never have made the advances we made. This is who we have the honor of supporting in Israel. That's who Yasmeen is. So I come to the same place where I think, what chutzpah, that I would have to lose hope. I mean, A.J. Heschel, maybe the greatest of our 20th century rabbis, said, despair is a sin that a Jew can't afford. And just substitute human being, and that's kind of my philosophy.
And I want to add to this one more thing.
We like to talk about
yes, for sure. But October 6, 2023 was Friday, and all of the weekend editions of the newspapers in Israel were talking about the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War and the trauma of the Yom Kippur War. And going back to that, there was a lot of analogies between our October 7th and October 6th, 1973. And I met actually in Boston a mother of a friend who was in her 20s back in the 70s, and I asked her, in 1974, did you think that Israel is going to have a peace agreement with Egypt? And she said, oh, absolutely not. We thought they were the devil. And everyone was so traumatized from the Yom Kippur War that no one could even imagine that we can have, Israel can have a peace agreement with Egypt. And lo and behold, 5.5 years after the war, the first peace agreement of Israel with any neighboring country was signed, and it is the oldest and the safest border of Israel since then. So, and it holds for almost 50 years, 40 plus. And I think that thinking about this story and thinking about conflicts around the world, right? They all are solved at some point. And I also remind myself, and I apologize in advance if this is triggering, but if Israel and Germany can have such good relationships, even a few decades, after the Holocaust, then no one can ever convince me that conflicts cannot be solved.
So let me ask you, since October 7th, it has felt like Israel and the Middle East was both so far away and also so proximate. I mean, it's been right here. You're sitting next to the hostage photos that we have had on the Bima ever since. And, we've been aware of many individual people and felt in some ways helpless in this distance, also while feeling deeply engaged in caring about what happens next. So what can we do here? Don't say donate a lot of money, because that's a great answer, but
you could donate a little bit of money.
in addition to supporting the New Israel Fund, what are the things, which is very important, and I've been a passionate supporter in every way of the New Israel Fund for decades, and I think it is one of the most important organizations that's functioning in America that is in our midst today. But what can we be doing, reading, learning, discussing? What are the things that we can do to feel engaged and to feel that we are part of whatever the next steps will be for peace and for a wonderful new beginning for Israel-Palestine?
I don't mean this as a pitch for the New Israel Fund. I totally do. But no, I really don't. But look, one of the challenges is, and I sort of referenced this earlier, and here I'll speak as an American, you can speak as an Israeli, right, and a Palestinian citizen of Israel, or however you want. But as an American who's been involved in this stuff my whole professional life, one of the things that is constantly frustrating and a little bewildering is about how this topic of Israel, for us, but for everybody else, it's not just for us, is a thing about which so many people feel so much emotion and passion, and they're so certain that what they feel and what they know is right, but they really don't know all that much at all, or maybe put a little bit more charitably, it's kind of like the parable of the blind men and the elephant, right? You remember this one. The blind men, let's say it's 9 blind men. Let's say it's 10, a minion. They find an elephant in the jungle, and each one feels a part of the elephant, and he knows that he now understands what an elephant is. An elephant is a big trunk-like, tree trunk-like leg. No, an elephant is a long, sinuous trunk. No, an elephant is a big floppy ear. And of course, what's sort of powerful and poignant about the old story for us is that we see that none of them are right, but they're not wrong either, right? But the problem is they don't see the whole elephant, and we don't see it. Not just us. People in the American, the Arab American, and the Muslim, and the Christian, and the left, and the right, and the conservatives, and the liberal, we don't see the whole elephant of Israel, right? And so what I would urge us to do is to try to pull back and see the elephant as best we can. And what that means in tachlis, like in nuts and bolts, what it means is pay the $9 a month and get a subscription to Haaretz. If you want to really understand deeply what's happening there, and you don't want the sort of official line, right? If you want true independent journalism that is often provocative and unpopular, but is almost always excellent, pay the $9 a month and support Haaretz and read the English language Haaretz about what's happening. There are plenty of smart, good books out there. I'd like to think mine is one, but there are plenty of other ones out there that can give you sight lines into what's happening in Israel today and give you some context and history, but educate yourself. And then the last thing is, if you peruse the NIF website, not for the donation page, but for the who we are and what we do, you will meet hundreds of Israelis like Yasmeen who are doing things that you are going to feel so excited about. And I mean, I'm looking at lots of friends in the audience here, and people who like me, for whom these people are inspiration. So when you know their stories, when you're educated about the context, then you begin to see the whole elephant, and your relationship with Israel becomes richer and more nuanced, and you understand also that it is neither black nor white. It is a place like all places of grays, and you can support the people who are trying to push it towards a better future.
That's really beautiful. A few more sentences first about educating yourself. I have to say, every time I go into a bookstore here in the US, I go almost immediately to the Middle East history shelf. And the reason for that is that this is the only place where I can find things written by Palestinian authors. Because when I go back home, there's no way. We can't find it. So I encourage you to do that and look for these books and look for these authors. And then going back to even talking about attacks against democracy, we do live in an era of democratic recession, not only in Israel but also here. And I would like to remind you that everything you do is resisting. So write an op-ed, talk to your family, call your reps about things that bother you. All these things are resistance. And I think the worst thing, the worst thing is feeling helpless. Because if you give in to the feeling of helplessness, then they really won. But we're much, like we are the majority. And we need to take to the streets when we care. And democracy is not majority rule or voting during elections. It's actually the fact that you took your time and came here to listen to us. And it's civil society, and it's free press, and it's free speech. And all these things are democracy. And eventually, they'll figure out that we are in control and not whoever is the president at the moment.
No organization has challenged me more to think and to hope and to dream about what Israel and its neighbors can be than the New Israel Fund over the decades that I've known about this organization. Whether it's been a study trip or a day of study when I've been in Israel, or speakers that have come here who have talked to us about the work on the ground that they're doing, or the hopeful vision that people have brought to us that we wouldn't otherwise know about. This organization has shaped my love for Israel and my hope for the future. So thank you both so much for being with us, and thank you to Orly for all the work that you do on a daily basis. I'm gonna
thank you, everybody, for staying. It's been a long evening. I want to just ask you all a question. I hope that I know the answer. How many of you, after hearing all of this tonight, are leaving with a little more hope than maybe when you came in? You did a good job. Thank you. Thank you all. So I want to just close by, again, thanking everyone at Sherith, and especially Rabbi Jessica Zimmerman Graf for welcoming us and for just the warmness that you bring to, I'm going to face this direction, the warmth that you bring to NIF all the time and the support. And thanks to all of you. Many of our supporters are here in the room. Thank you. I'm going to tell you a few different ways you can get engaged, and then I will say goodnight and thank you to our speakers. So, first off, this coming Monday, we have a webinar. If you're on the NIF list, you should have gotten it. If you're not, make sure you scan the QR code so you can hear about it. It's an emergency webinar about the situation on the ground on the West Bank. Very difficult stories, but you're hearing from the activists on the ground, human rights organizational leaders, peace activists. It's going to be very strong. That's at 9 a.m. on Monday the 10th. Then go to Israel. If you're thinking about going to Israel, we have 2 trips in 2026, one in March 8th to the 12th, another October 11th to the 16th. There is nothing that compares to seeing the work for yourself on the ground. Rabbi Jessica knows it is an extraordinary, life-changing trip. And of course, you can support us if you haven't already. There's a QR code on your paper, actually. If you have that little paper on your seat, there's a QR code you can scan. We also have a donor-advised fund at NIF called the Progressive Jewish Fund. There's information about that as you leave. We have a legacy society that you can check out. Also information on the desk as you leave. And tell your friends. Talk about this work. Like Yasmeen says, if people are feeling a sense of helplessness or hopelessness, maybe they just don't have the right circles, and we can help expand those circles. So I thank you all for being here. Thanks to everybody, our co-sponsors, and to our amazing speakers.